Imagine you're at Copenhagen Airport. It's one of the busiest hubs up in Northern Europe.
Right.
You've just grabbed a coffee, you're waiting at the gate, maybe scrolling on your phone. Everything is perfectly, boringly normal.
The usual airport routine.
Exactly. Then suddenly an announcement crackles over the PA system. It's terse, vague, all flights suspended, airspace incident.
That immediately sounds worrying.
It does. And the departure boards. A moment ago, a list of destinations, now they just flash red.
Right.
Whispers start spreading. It's not a bomb threat in the terminal, not a technical glitch with the runway.
So what is it?
It turns out the entire airport, this multi-billion-dollar piece of critical infrastructure, has been brought to a complete standstill.
By what?
By just a few small, unidentified drones buzzing somewhere out there in the night sky.
Wow. Just drones. Small ones.
And it gets worse. The same week, this exact scene plays out at other airports. Denmark, Norway.
Okay, so it's not isolated?
Not at all. And over Poland, you have multi-million-dollar NATO jets scramble to hunt down and destroy these same cheap, remote-controlled objects.
So expensive jets chasing cheap drones, that sounds inefficient.
Wildly inefficient. And officials aren't calling this just a nuisance anymore. They're calling it a hybrid attack.
A hybrid attack. That's a serious term.
It is a coordinated, invisible siege by these, well, remote-controlled ghosts, designed to test and paralyze a continent.
And this sudden vulnerability, this exposure.
It's forcing an entire block of nations to rally behind a solution, something that, honestly, until recently sounded like science fiction.
Which is?
A massive high-tech drone wall.
Right. That opening anecdote really captures the sheer, the immediate vulnerability Europe is feeling right now.
It really does.
For years, defense strategy was all about high-end threats, big missiles, fighter jets.
That conventional stuff.
Exactly. Now, the new reality, it's defined by these small, cheap, often commercially available unmanned aircraft systems, or UAS drones, basically.
It's the absolute definition of an asymmetric threat, isn't it? And it seems to have caught an entire continent, well, off guard.
It really has. And that's precisely the focus for us today in this deep dive.
Okay.
We're investigating how this proposed European drone wall represents a radical strategic shift, a real change in thinking for both the EU and NATO defense policy.
A necessary shift, it sounds like.
Definitely. We need to look at the huge technological capabilities required to actually build this thing and integrate it across all these different national borders.
That sounds incredibly complex already.
Oh, it is. And then there are the perhaps most critical hurdles, the complex political and financial challenges. How do you fund this? How do you sustain this kind of collective defense system across the entire eastern flank?
Right.
It's not just another military project. It's like a whole continental reimagining of what security even means in this new era.
Okay, let's unpack that strategic shift then, because the events just in the last few months seem to have injected a massive dose of urgency into this whole discussion. When officials use that term, hybrid attack, what actually makes these specific incidents like the Copenhagen airport closure part of a coordinated effort? Is it just timing?
It's the timing, the target type, and the pattern. You have to see it as a kind of testing regime.
Testing NATO's defenses.
Exactly. So besides those airport disruptions in Denmark and Norway you mentioned, we've also seen confirmed Russian drone incursions into Polish airspace, into Romanian airspace, and Russian fighter jets violating Estonian airspace repeatedly, sometimes for like 12 minutes before Italian F-35s could even intercept them.
12 minutes, that feels like a long time in airspace terms.
It is. The consensus among officials, the intelligence community, is that this whole string of events, some kinetic, some non-kinetic, like the airport shutdowns, it's designed specifically to probe NATO's response mechanisms.
Find the weak spots.
Precisely. Identify weak points in surveillance, test reaction times, assess the coherence of the alliance's readiness. How quickly can they respond? How coordinated is that response?
So it's maybe not about causing immediate catastrophic damage right now.
Not necessarily.
But more about proving the ability to disrupt, to harass critical civilian infrastructure whenever they want.
That's exactly it. The threat is characterized by these low-cost, high-impact aerial incursions. The tech itself, often it's just commercial-grade stuff, cheap to buy, easy to use for, well, nefarious purposes.
Like what?
Could be simple surveillance, could be delivering contraband. You hear about this over prisons sometimes. Or it could be small kinetic attacks, using explosives.
Right.
The strategic failure, really, up until now, was this belief that Cheap technology couldn't paralyze, billion-dollar infrastructure. Copenhagen proved that wrong.
And this leads directly to what some policy experts are calling the uncomfortable truth.
Which is?
That current EU and NATO defense systems, the ones we have now, are fundamentally unprepared for massed, cheap drone threats.
Yeah.
The whole established defense doctrine was built around engaging high-value, identifiable threats, tanks, fighter jets, big missiles, things you can see coming, relatively speaking.
Exactly. That old doctrine is, frankly, strategically bankrupt against this new kind of threat profile. It just doesn't work.
So what's the required change?
That's why the policy transformation needed is moving away from what some call peacetime notions of efficient defense, where you're trying to get the most bang for your buck in a predictable conflict.
Okay.
The new imperative, the new focus, is shifting towards something called a mass interception economy.
A mass interception economy. Okay, that sounds significant. It basically means they need to make stopping drones much, much cheaper, right?
It is dramatic, but it's a necessary way to frame it. The goal isn't just stopping the attack anymore. The goal is winning the economic battle.
Okay.
We absolutely must aim for a cost of neutralizing a drone that gets close to the cost of the drone itself.
Because
otherwise, as long as you're spending millions of dollars or euros to stop something that costs maybe tens of thousands, well, the attacker wins the war of attrition. Simple math. Doesn't matter how many drones you shoot down if you go broke doing it.
Right. That makes sense.
So the strategic decision by Europe now is that this drone wall, whatever it looks like, must be designed from the ground up to achieve that new economic reality. Cost effectiveness has to be baked in.
And crucially, this can't just be, say, Poland doing its own thing and Romania doing its own thing. It needs to be joined up.
Absolutely not. That's a key point. EU leaders like Ursula von der Leyen have been very explicit. This is envisioned as a single European capability developed, deployed, and sustained jointly with real-time response.
A single shield.
A single shield, exactly, covering the entire eastern frontier, creating an unambiguous collective defense posture, demonstrating unity against this perceived hybrid threat.
But, this strategic shift, it isn't just about military budgets and high-level policy documents. It fundamentally changes the day-to-day reality for people living on what's become an invisible front line.
That's a really important point.
I was particularly struck by the accounts we saw about Stanisław. He's a farmer in eastern Poland, not far from the border.
He really puts a human face on this vulnerability, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. For him, the sky used to mean the usual things: planting season, harvest time, the weather forecast.
Rural life.
Exactly. Now his relationship with his environment, with the sky above him, it's been fundamentally altered. He's listening for a sound that shouldn't be there.
What kind of sound?
A low, persistent buzzing. He described it like a swarm of angry hornets.
That's unsettling.
It is. And he and his neighbors, they're talking about unidentified drones now, not in hushed tones about military secrets, but just normal conversation. Domestic anxiety at the local market.
What?
These people aren't soldiers, obviously, but they are suddenly living on an invisible front line defined by these aerial threats buzzing overhead.
That anecdote is just critical to understanding this. Hybrid warfare is incredibly effective at eroding psychological security. It makes people feel unsafe in their own homes, their own fields.
Yeah.
So the strategic shift, yes, it requires protecting physical assets like airports and power grids, but it also requires protecting the psychological stability of that frontline population.
So the success of the drone wall isn't just measured in drones shot down.
Not at all. Ultimately, its success will be measured in whether people like Stanisław feel their day-to-day existence has been secured again. Yeah. Whether that background anxiety fades, that's the real test. #Tech3, the economics of interception and the Ukrainian model.
Okay, let's drill down into that economic challenge again, because, as you said, it really dictates the entire technical response needed. The numbers involved in the current cost mismatch are just, they're staggering.
They truly are. Just think about the premier long-range anti-air system, the Patriot missile.
Right, a gold standard.
One interceptor missile can cost up to $4 million per shot.
$4 million to shoot down potentially a $10,000 drone.
Exactly. Or look at using high-cost fighter jets. Even flying an older F-16 costs upwards of $20,000 per hour. Newer jets, like an F-35, can run up to $85,000 per hour, just for operational time.
That's just fuel and maintenance, not even the weapons.
Right. So if you use this incredibly expensive, sophisticated, multi-million-dollar machinery to neutralize drones that might cost, say, $10,000, maybe $50,000 at the high end, You are bankrupting your own defense budget far, far faster than the enemy is spending theirs.
The economic math just completely falls apart.
Utterly. It's unsustainable for dealing with mass drone attacks.
So if Europe simply cannot afford to continue that model, they have to fundamentally change the inputs, change the way they do interception.
Correct.
And this is why the entire alliance seems to be turning its eyes towards Ukraine, viewing them as, effectively, the world's foremost experts now on mass drone warfare.
They absolutely are the proving ground. They've been living this reality intensely for years now.
And Europe wants to learn from that.
Very much so.
Yeah.
The EU is leveraging this directly with the planned $6 billion drone alliance with Ukraine. The aim is to rapidly transfer and, crucially, mass produce the wartime proven technologies and tactics that Europe desperately needs to scale up its own production capabilities.
Okay, so what specifically is the key operational difference in the Ukrainian model that Europe wants to replicate? Is it just about having cheaper hardware, or is it something deeper, like a faster process?
It's both, but the process and the speed are arguably even more important than just the hardware itself.
How so?
Well, Ukraine utilizes this incredibly disciplined, creative conveyor belt, going from recognizing a need on the front line to actually achieving serial production of a solution in a matter of weeks.
Weeks, not years.
Weeks. They have completely compressed that traditional battlefield-to-factory loop.
How do they manage that?
They incentivize innovation directly. For example, we heard about systems where confirmed drone strikes earn units E-points.
Like loyalty points.
Sort of, yeah. And these units can then convert those points into purchases of new equipment through specific approved marketplaces, like one called Brave One.
Wow.
This cuts right through the layers of bureaucratic procurement processes that traditionally slow down defense acquisition in the EU and NATO by months, if not years.
That sounds like agile software development, but applied to national security. I can definitely see why that speed is incredibly appealing right now, given the threat.
Absolutely. Speed and adaptation are everything in this kind of warfare.
And what's the most tangible result of this rapid iteration that directly applies to the drone wall strategy?
It's the interceptor drone itself. Ukraine has pioneered these small, cheap, essentially expendable interceptor UAVs.
How cheap are we talking?
We're talking units costing somewhere between $1,500 and maybe $6,000 per unit.
Okay, that's a completely different ballpark from a $4 million missile.
No. Exactly. And these cheap interceptors are proving highly effective at knocking down those longer-range strike threats, like the Iranian Shahed-type drones Russia has been using extensively.
So the core strategy shifts. Instead of using multi-million-dollar precision-guided missiles, you use disposable, cheap interceptor drones to take out cheap attacking drones. That solves the economic mismatch perfectly.
It completely reverses the economic equation. It makes defense affordable again, even against mass attacks.
But is it just about drones fighting drones?
No, and that's another key lesson. The Ukrainian model also includes really ingenious, sometimes lower-tech ground responses that complement the high-tech sensors.
Like what?
They deploy these rapid response teams using fast-wheeled vehicles. Think ordinary commercial pickups, maybe lightly armored SUVs.
Okay.
These teams are networked together using tablets and comms. They spread out along known or suspected drone flight paths.
And then what?
And then they use simple automatic gunfire to bring the targets down. Heavy machine guns, sometimes even just rifle fire from multiple shooters.
Wait, really? So we're talking about potentially using high-tech sensors only to vector in a sort of high-speed technical, a pickup truck with a machine gun bolted on.
That's the beauty of wartime pragmatism. It works. It's a solution that is orders of magnitude cheaper than launching a missile. It's incredibly mobile. And crucially, it often puts highly trained human eyes on the target for final confirmation before opening fire. Reduces misidentification risk.
So it's integrating high-tech detection with low-tech but very cost-effective destruction, layered defense in action.
Precisely. It's about using the right tool, even if it's a very basic tool at the right cost for the specific threat layer you're trying to counter.
Okay, so winning that economic battle means we need to actually weave this invisible technological net, something that can catch these fast, small, often low-flying objects effectively.
That's the challenge.
When we talk about counter-unmanned aircraft systems or CUAS, what's the sort of mandatory operational framework? How does it work step by step?
Right, the CUAS framework is very systematic. It has to be. It relies on exploiting basically every process and physical attribute of the drone you can find.
Like what attributes?
Its radio emissions, its material properties, what it reflects on radar, even the sound it makes.
Okay.
The operational cycle, the processing chain. It functions through a pretty rigid sequence that ideally needs to be automated as much as possible. First, detect, find it. Second, locate, track, figure out exactly where it is and where it's going. Third, classify, identify. What is it? Is it friendly, hostile, or just commercial?
And finally,
number 4, mitigate, neutralize. Take action against it. But crucially, if you fail at any of the first 3 steps, the fourth one, neutralization, becomes impossible or incredibly risky.
And the fundamental challenge here, I guess, is that a cheap drone is often designed specifically to try and defeat a single type of sensor.
Exactly.
So this drone wall can't just rely on radar, for example. It requires a combination of many different sensor types all working together.
Precisely. That's the core concept. No single sensor layer can handle a full spectrum of threats. You might have tiny, quiet surveillance drones one minute, and then larger, louder cruise missile surrogates the next. You need layers.
Okay, let's walk through some of those layers. Let's start with the passive forms of detection. We know about acoustic sensors, right? Listening for the drone.
Right. Acoustic sensors are actually very useful, especially in certain environments. They're passive, meaning they don't emit anything themselves. They use these arrays of highly sensitive microphones to detect the unique acoustic signature, the sound, of UAV motors and propellers.
So they work best against certain types of drones?
Yes, they work exceptionally well against slower, propeller-driven threats like those Shahed 136s we mentioned. Their motor noise is quite distinct and persistent. Ukraine's Zvuk project, for instance, leverages this tech extensively.
But what's the downside?
The big downside is noise pollution. Acoustic performance degrades significantly in high-traffic areas, near cities, near airports, because of all the background noise. So they're less reliable in those critical urban environments. Better for quiet, remote border areas.
Okay. What about systems that track the drone by its communication signals? The signals it sends out.
That's passive RF, or radio frequency detection. These systems essentially listen for and analyze the radio signals the drone uses, primarily the command and control, or C2 link, back to the operator, and any telemetry data the drone sends back.
How do they know what they're listening to?
They use these extensive digital libraries of known radio signatures. They know what the signals look like for different manufacturers, different models, operating on common frequencies like 2.4 gigahertz, 5.8 gigahertz, maybe 433 megahertz, 915 megahertz.
So they can identify the drone type just by listening?
Often, yes. They can classify the manufacturer and model pretty quickly if it's in the library.
And how do they figure out where the drone is, or maybe even where the operator is located?
Okay, for location, they use techniques like direction finding, or DF, basically figuring out which direction the signal is coming from. More advanced systems use techniques like time difference of arrival, TDOA.
TDOA, how does that work?
TDOA needs multiple receivers spread out geographically. They all listen for the same drone signal. By measuring the tiny, tiny differences in when that signal arrives at each separate sensor, the system can triangulate the exact location of the thing emitting the signal.
So you can pinpoint the drone in the air?
Yes, and potentially, if you're tracking the C2 link, you might even get a location for the ground control station, the operator, which is obviously very valuable intelligence.
Okay, that brings us to the active systems then, specifically radar. That's the cornerstone of traditional air defense, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Radar remains the indispensable active sensor. It works by transmitting radio signals and then analyzing the reflections that bounce back.
But how does it tell a drone from, say, a flock of birds or just bad weather?
That's where Doppler radar comes in. It's critical. Doppler radar can differentiate moving targets from stationary objects or things moving differently, like weather, clutter, or birds.
And for this drone wall, we need something more advanced than the old spinning dishes, right?
Definitely. We need advanced 3D radars, often using what are called phased array antennas.
Phased array, what makes that different from the big rotating dish we all picture when we think of radar?
It's the difference between a physical movement and an electronic one, essentially. The old rotating dish has to physically move to sweep its beam across the sky.
Right.
A phased array antenna, though, it might have thousands of tiny individual radiating elements inside it. And each one can individually control the phase, the timing of the radio waves it sends out.
Okay. So what does that let it do?
It allows the system to steer the radar beam electronically, almost instantaneously, across a very wide area without any physical movement at all.
Much faster scanning.
Much, much faster. And that speed is absolutely vital for tracking small, fast, potentially highly maneuverable targets like drones. And critically, these 3D radars give you range, azimuth, the horizontal direction, and most importantly, the elevation angle, the altitude of the target. You need all three dimensions.
And finally, after all this electronic detection, you still need visual confirmation, presumably.
Ideally, yes. That's where electro-optical infrared, or EOIR sensors come in.
Cameras, basically.
High-resolution cameras, yes. Operating in both normal visible light and in the infrared spectrum, so they can see heat signatures, useful at night or in bad weather.
And these are passive. They don't send out signals.
Completely passive, which makes them essential for detecting drones that might be flying RF silent, maybe on a pre-programmed GPS route, without actively communicating.
So they back up the other systems.
Exactly. They're typically used as secondary sensors. They get cued, pointed in the right direction by the location data coming from the radar or the passive RF systems. Then the camera provides that visual confirmation, helps classify the target definitively, and tracks it visually.
Okay, so we've layered the detection. We think we found something hostile. Now we move to neutralization. What does the drone wall have in its toolkit for actually mitigating the threat?
Right. The mitigation options generally fall into two main pillars: electronic and kinetic.
Electronic first.
Electronic mitigation primarily involves jamming and spoofing.
Jamming, we understand, blasting noise to block signals.
Pretty much. RF jamming targets the command and control link between the drone and operator. GNSS jamming targets the GPS or other satellite navigation signals the drone relies on.
What happens to the drone when it's jammed?
It depends on its programming. A well-programmed drone, when it loses its links, will often default to an emergency state. Maybe it just hovers in place, maybe it tries to land safely, or maybe it attempts to fly back to its launch point using its internal inertial navigation system if it has one.
But jamming on a massive scale across borders, that sounds like it could cause serious problems for civilian airplanes, doesn't it? They rely on GPS, too.
It's a monumental coordination headache. You're absolutely right. Large-scale, high-power jamming can severely disrupt legitimate civilian air traffic, potentially leading to dangerous situations. It's a huge deconfliction challenge.
So what are the alternatives to just brute force jamming?
That's where spoofing comes in, which is often more subtle and preferred if possible. Spoofing attempts to actively mislead the UAV.
How?
You could broadcast fake GNSS signals trying to trick the drone into thinking it's somewhere else, throwing it off course. Or you might try to exploit weaknesses in its communication protocols, potentially hijacking it or disrupting its function, a sort of man-in-the-middle attack.
But the attackers adapt too, right?
Constantly. They develop drones that use frequency-hopping radios, making them harder to jam. Or they might use fiber optic control links for short ranges, which are completely immune to electronic warfare. It's a constant cat-and-mouse game, forcing constant counter-adaptation on the defense side.
Okay, so if electronic means don't work or aren't suitable, then you move to kinetic mitigation, physical action.
Correct.
We mentioned the cheap interceptor drones already. What other physical tools are being developed or used?
Well, kinetic solutions can range quite a bit. You have specialized projectile devices, things that shoot nets, basically.
Yeah.
Net guns launched from the ground or even from other larger drones.
Catch them in a net.
Exactly. Or you have larger counter-UAS drones designed specifically to physically capture smaller drones, maybe with nets or other mechanisms, or even just disable them through collision or directed energy.
And I remember reading about some more unusual low-tech ideas.
Yes, there have been some fascinating, almost surprising low-tech considerations, like the attempts a few years back by Dutch police, I believe it was, to train actual eagles and hawks to physically intercept and disable small drones.
Wait, seriously, trained eagles, that's an incredible juxtaposition, isn't it? You've got billion-euro 3D phased array radars and AI battle management systems. And right alongside that, potentially, you have a trained bird of prey doing the actual interception work.
It's a perfect illustration of that layered, pragmatic approach you need. Use the $100 million radar system to detect and track the threat, absolutely, but then use the most cost-effective solution available to actually bring it down safely.
Right.
Whether that's a $5,000 interceptor drone, a burst of machine gun fire, or, yes, maybe even a trained eagle in some specific scenario.
Whatever works and whatever fits the budget.
Exactly. However, none of this incredible technology works without massive industrial scale-up. This whole deployment, this drone wall, requires harnessing immense industrial and intellectual capacity across Europe. I read about a Danish engineer, Ingrid, working near Aalborg.
Ingrid, she represents the human factor in this huge defense buildup, doesn't she? The people actually making it happen.
She does. And she's not focused on the high-level geopolitics. You know, her focus is the technical architecture. She's literally weaving this incredibly complex net of radio frequencies, radar signal processing, complex algorithms.
Making it all work together.
Making sure her software can interpret the data streams coming in from a dozen different sensor systems made by different NATO vendors, all in real time. The pressure on her team is intense, especially knowing that a major airport nearby was shut down just weeks ago by the very threat they're trying to stop.
Yeah.
The scale-up demands robust, interoperable European defense contractor capability, ensuring that components from, say, a Finnish radar manufacturer can immediately and seamlessly communicate with Romanian jamming systems and Polish command and control centers. That interoperability is key. #TAG-V. The challenge of integration and interoperability.
And Ingrid's challenge, making all those different systems from different countries and different companies actually talk to each other reliably, that sounds like maybe the single biggest hurdle here.
It absolutely is.
We can have amazing individual components, great radars, clever jammers, fast interceptors, but getting them all to work together smoothly across a huge multinational theater of operations. That seems almost impossibly complex. This is the integration phase.
It is the critical integration hurdle.
Yeah.
And tackling it effectively requires adopting automated big data solutions. It's just too much information for humans to handle manually in real time.
So you need computers to manage the complexity.
You do. As the experts keep stressing, you have to, and I quote, integrate everything from the largest Patriot missile battery down to the smallest interceptor drone completely seamlessly.
Because if they don't talk?
If every system speaks a different digital language, if the data isn't standardized, human operators will simply be overwhelmed by the flood of input from countless disparate systems during a mass attack scenario. The system would collapse under its own weight.
So in a way, the software architecture, the code that connects everything, is the true defense layer of this wall, maybe even more important than the physical hardware itself.
That's a great way to put it. Absolutely. What is required is what technologists call a drone-agnostic software layer.
Drone-agnostic, meaning it doesn't care what specific drone or sensor it's dealing with.
Exactly. It's a layer of software that sits above all the diverse hardware inputs. This layer has to use secure, interoperable application programming interfaces, APIs.
APIs, we hear that term a lot in tech. What do they do here?
Think of APIs in this context as instantaneous, universal translators for military data. They compensate for the wildly different data formats, inputs, and outputs coming from hundreds of different sensors and weapon systems, maybe from dozens of different vendors, operating simultaneously across 10 or more countries.
So they standardize everything.
They standardize the data before it even hits the main command and control center, making it usable and understandable.
Are there any existing models for this kind of high-level multi-system integration? Or is Europe basically building this from scratch?
No, thankfully the models exist. And again, perhaps unsurprisingly, Ukraine is seen as the gold standard here.
Their systems. Their
battlefield management systems like Viraz and Delta, are widely considered world leaders in this kind of integrated defense command and control.
What makes them so good?
They provide a real-time, common operating picture by effectively merging data streams from everything from high-end military radar down to commercial drone telemetry feeds, even civilian sensor inputs like traffic cameras sometimes. They fuse it all together.
That sounds incredibly powerful.
It is. And they offer a level of security and, crucially, flexibility that many traditional, more rigid NATO command systems often lack. So yes, Europe is studying these Ukrainian systems very, very intently.
And speed is absolutely paramount in interception, right? You need to react instantly. That's where the processing, the decision-making probably needs to be taken over, or at least heavily assisted by artificial intelligence, AI.
Exactly right. AI-enabled systems are not just nice to have here. They are absolutely necessary. You need them to automate large parts of the reconnaissance, the threat assessment, the planning, and even the firing solutions.
But why the automation?
The ultimate goal is to maximize autonomy where appropriate, to compress what the military calls the kill chain. That's the sequence. Detect, decide, destroy.
Okay.
If a human operator has to manually process every single radar ping, then cross-reference it with an acoustic signature, then visually confirm on a camera feed, and then request permission to fire, well, the system will inevitably fail against massed attacks. There just isn't time.
So AI has to handle the initial sorting and decision logic.
AI must be the primary decision logic engine in many cases, capable of compressing that whole timeline from potentially minutes down to fractions of a second in some scenarios.
But introducing so many complex defensive layers from different nations, potentially operating with high degrees of autonomy, That raises some really severe operational risks, doesn't it? I'm thinking specifically about the risk of friendly fire, blue-on-blue incidents.
It is a critical concern. And sadly, we have real-world examples from the conflict in Ukraine showing just how catastrophic coordination failures can be.
Such as?
Well, there have been credible reports suggesting that Ukraine has tragically lost at least one of its own valuable F-16 fighter jets due to friendly fire incidents, likely resulting from poorly coordinated or deconflicted air defenses during a complex attack.
Wow, that's devastating. How do you mitigate that in a system like the drone wall?
Operational integration needs incredibly smart, clear delegation and deconfliction rules. Solutions might involve assigning different layers of altitude to different weapon systems, say. Interceptor drones handle everything below 5,000 feet. Missiles handle things above that.
Or different geographic areas.
Or assigning different geographical sectors to specific systems or even specific nations. Or using very clear rules of engagement that might delegate detection duties to one party, but interception authority strictly to another. The key is preventing multiple systems from trying to engage the same target simultaneously without coordination.
So robust integration isn't just about stopping the enemy effectively. It's just as much about avoiding self-inflicted damage through accidents.
It's fundamentally about systemic trust and clear procedures. The hardware, no matter how advanced, is only as good as the political agreements and the technical protocols that allow it to operate safely without accidentally shooting down a friendly aircraft or causing civilian harm. #tags financial and political hurdles.
Okay, we've established the strategic need, it's clear. We've looked at the incredible technological blueprint required. Now we have to confront the really thorny issues, the funding, and the political will.
Often the hardest parts.
Especially in the context of the EU, this is often the slowest and most complex part of any massive cross-border infrastructure project. And the initial rejection of those early funding requests you mentioned really illustrates this political inertia perfectly.
It really does. That initial inertia is, frankly, a story of political short-sightedness at the time. Think about the plight of Ilara, I think her name was, the Lithuanian civil servant we read about.
Right, from Lithuania.
She was part of a joint team, along with Estonia, that put forward a funding request. Just $12 million, relatively small, for a system specifically targeting these small, low-flying UAS threats along their borders.
And the European Commission said no.
Initially, yes, they rejected it. The political will just wasn't there yet. Defense was still largely seen as a purely national competence, a national responsibility, not really a collective EU priority requiring collective funding.
That initial rejection must have been incredibly frustrating for them, knowing the threat was real. It validates that incredibly sobering lesson she apparently heard from her contacts in Ukraine.
What was that again?
You are learning in meeting rooms what we are learning in blood.
Oof, yeah, that hits hard.
It really does. And it tragically took those subsequent high-profile incidents, the drone incursions over Poland, the complete shutdown of Copenhagen Airport to finally accelerate the political will in Brussels and across the member states.
It took the threat becoming immediate, domestic, and highly visible. Now, the consensus is that the overall expected cost of this drone wall initiative will run into the billions of euros. Maybe tens of billions over time.
Billions, okay.
And to meet this scale of need, the EU is making some pretty unprecedented moves in its proposed long-term budget, the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, or MFF.
What are they proposing?
They're proposing to significantly increase the budget line specifically for defense and space, raising it to a staggering euro 31 billion over the next budget period.
131 billion. How does that compare to previous levels?
It's nearly 5 times more than the previously dedicated to these areas in the EU budget. It's a massive shift in priorities.
Okay, but how exactly are they proposing to raise or allocate that vast sum of money? That requires unified fiscal action across 27 member states, which is never easy.
No, it's not. And the financing options currently under debate for this huge defense budget increase are, as you might expect, highly contentious and politically charged.
What are the main options on the table?
There are basically 3 main paths being discussed. First, the most straightforward but politically difficult for some is simply increasing member states' direct contributions to the central EU budget, more money from national capitals.
Option 2.
Second, reallocating existing funds from other parts of the EU budget, taking money away from, say, agriculture or regional development funds, and putting it into defense, also politically painful.
And the third option? Sounds like the controversial one.
The third, and yes, the most controversial, is the idea of the EU raising loans directly on the financial markets through joint debt issuance, essentially creating Eurobonds specifically for defense.
Wow. Eurobonds for defense. That would be a monumental step, wouldn't it? It would signify a major leap in shared fiscal responsibility for security.
It absolutely would. It could bring the EU significantly closer to becoming a true fiscal union, at least in the defense sector.
What's the argument for it?
Supporters argue it's necessary to achieve the immediate scale of funding required. It allows the EU to pool resources quickly and efficiently, borrowing at potentially favorable rates based on the collective creditworthiness of the bloc.
And the opposition.
Opponents, particularly from the more fiscally conservative frugal nations in the north, worry intensely that it's a slippery slope, a stepping stone toward permanent debt mutualization across the board, which they fear could fracture the delicate fiscal unity established by existing treaties like Maastricht.
So, a major political battle brewing there.
A huge one. And just to add another layer of complexity, outside of that traditional EU framework discussion, there's another quite contentious proposal gaining traction. The creation of something called a European Defense Mechanism, or EDM. Sometimes it's referred to informally as a rearmament bank.
A rearmament bank. Okay. Yeah. What's the political objective behind setting up this separate EDM structure?
This proposal is being championed particularly by countries like the UK, obviously non-EU now, and Poland, among others. The idea is to create a dedicated structure through an intergovernmental treaty, one that operates outside the direct control of the European Commission in Brussels.
Why outside the Commission? What's the goal?
The goal seems to be primarily twofold: achieving greater speed and allowing broader scope.
Speed and scope. How does operating outside the EU structure achieve that, practically speaking?
Well, first, proponents argue the EDM could facilitate joint procurement of defense equipment much, much faster than the notoriously slow bureaucratic pace of Brussels. Cut through the red tape.
Okay, speed makes sense. What about scope?
Second, and this is crucial financially, the EDM would aim to remove military expenditure undertaken through it from national deficit calculations under EU rules.
So it wouldn't count against the budget deficit limit.
Exactly. Under the current EU Stability and Growth Pact rules, massive defense spending increases can push member states over their deficit limits, triggering potential fines or corrective measures. Removing this specific expenditure would provide immediate budgetary flexibility for nations that feel they need to rearm very quickly right now.
And the third benefit?
Third, because it would be set up via an intergovernmental treaty, not an EU institution, it automatically allows non-EU states, think the UK, maybe Norway, potentially even Switzerland, to participate fully in major European defense industrial programs right from the start as equal partners.
Okay, so the argument is that it's a necessary mechanism for rapid, flexible action, and it helps incorporate key non-EU partners like the UK more easily. Why is this proposal viewed with such suspicion in Brussels, then?
It raises profound political and institutional concerns for many in the EU establishment. Many in Brussels see the EDM as an explicit attempt to short-circuit the process of European integration, specifically in the military-industrial sector.
How so? Undermining the EU's role.
The fear is that if member states, potentially led by influential ones like Poland, create a parallel structure for defense procurement and finance that intentionally marginalizes the European Commission and existing EU bodies like the European Defense Agency, well, it risks undermining decades of work toward building a unified, integrated European defense policy under the EU umbrella.
So it could fragment efforts.
It could fragment efforts, create competing power centers. Critics argue that existing EU mechanisms, like quick loan programs under initiatives like SAFE, already offer sufficient speed if the political will is there. They suggest the true objective of the EDM might be more political, perhaps, to permanently institutionalize an alternative, non-commission-led defense structure in Europe, potentially weakening Brussels' influence in this critical area.
So the drone wall isn't just a technology contest against external threats. It's also becoming a major political battleground over the future architecture of European military cooperation and fiscal policy itself.
That sums it up perfectly. The ultimate success of the drone wall depends just as much on the political capacity of European nations to unify standards, overcome these deep internal fiscal divides, and agree on a command structure, as it does on their technical ability to deploy fleets of interceptor drones and advanced phased array radar systems. The politics might be even harder than the tech. #ShagSev7 outro. So, when we really look at the sheer scope of this, the drone wall concept is far, far more complex than its simple name might suggest.
It's definitely not just a wall.
Not at all. It's not a static barrier in any sense. It has to be an integrated, dynamic, constantly evolving ecosystem. It's made up of sophisticated hardware, yes, but also agile software, intricate political consensus, international cooperation, and fundamentally it's built on those cost-effective countermeasures being learned right now in the crucible of conflict. Its successful deployment, its actual realization, it hinges not only on securing those multi-billion euro funding streams we talked about, which is a huge challenge in itself, but just as much on the political capacity, the political will of the EU and its partners to adopt that rapid, flexible, cost-effective defense innovation model that Ukraine has unfortunately had to prove works on the modern battlefield.
It feels like the era of meeting these low-cost, asymmetric threats with hugely expensive, high-cost missiles is definitively over. It just doesn't scale.
It cannot scale.
So this drone wall initiative, it really marks a seismic strategic change for Europe. It's signaling that Russia's coordinated hybrid warfare tactics, these attempts to paralyze and probe, they will be met with Europe's united, increasingly high-tech, and crucially economically sustainable wall in the sky.
That's the ambition.
The collective transformation of European defense seems to be the absolute priority now, shifting the future battlefield into a space that's defined by deeply layered sensing, pervasive AI integration for speed, and the ability to mass-produce effective, cheap interceptors. That seems to be the path forward.